Welcome to the second insight in the Emerging Leader podcast. So like I said last week, the insights are meant to be these really short episodes where I just talk about things that I've learned or things that are really making a difference to me in a short, snappy episode that I bring to you on Thursdays. So with this episode, I want to talk to you about 3 books that have completely transformed my life. Some of them I read ages ago, a couple of them more recently, and I do have a couple of them here with me as well. And so I'm excited to share these with you because if I could recommend any books, and anyone that knows me or Joe knows that we read a ton of books, so I have heaps of recommendations. But if I was to start anywhere, and truly also not just for you to read these books, but if you actually embody what they're talking about, I feel like these books also have the power to transform your life as well. And they are classics, so I wouldn't be surprised if you guys have read them as well. So to list them out, the 3 books I'm going to cover today are The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman, and The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. So the key ideas in these books are absolutely crucial for anything that you want to do in your life, whether that's careers or creative projects or podcasts or anything, but also just for life. And especially, and what I love about 4,000 Weeks is it's especially timely with the social media pressure and just the work from home pressure and just the endless books about time management that we can consume. I just love it. So with that being said, thank you for listening to the second insight, and I really hope you enjoyed the episode. The Emerging Leader Podcast. All right, so first of the 3 books I want to talk about today is The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. I have my copy here. The cover has been ripped off in a move, but that also means I've read this so many times and I have so many notes throughout this book. It's very short, only takes a couple of hours to read. And whenever I'm going through a transformative time in my life, I always refer back to this. And this book is based on 4 main lessons throughout the book, which I absolutely love. They're just critical and the explanations are just incredible. So the first one is be impeccable with your word. So that means speak with integrity, use your words powerfully and with meaning, but don't also speak bad about yourself and bad about other people. Your words, if they have all of this power, make sure to use them wisely. Don't gossip about others and things like that. But also use your words to create as well. So use them to speak into existence what you want in your life. And it sounds a bit, woo-woo and all of that, but I really like the whole concept around your words have so much power and to take that really seriously as well, which I think in your career really links to your personal brand as well, because it's not helpful if you're known as someone who gossips or lies or isn't true to their word or doesn't do the things that they'll say they do, which I've definitely been on the other side of this, where I personally have struggled to keep my word on things. And so having integrity with my word is something I'm always working on, and always there's room for improvement. So that's the first lesson. The second one, which is just probably the most critical in this whole book, is don't take anything personally. The amount of power you give away to other people when you take things personally is just incredible, rather than keeping the power to yourself, and realizing that what other people are saying and doing is a projection of what's happening in their life and actually has very little to do with you. So don't take it personally. I currently embody this all the time at work, especially, and this is especially important when you're asking for feedback. And I think feedback is so important and something that I personally am always trying to ask for more of and get more of so that I can improve. But if you take things personally, you're never going to be confident to ask for feedback unless it's good feedback, right? So you need to be able to not take things personally. It doesn't mean anything about you. It means more about the other person. But that being said, also, that doesn't mean that you don't take the feedback, because if someone says, look, you're slacking a bit in your work or you're too busy worrying about, one thing instead of being focused on this other thing, or I think you could focus more on taking people on the journey, or whatever the feedback is. Don't just brush it off and say, well, that has nothing to do with me. That's everything to do with you. Like, that's not what this means. It means more about when people are like acting negatively towards you, you need to not give your power away to them. But I think very applicable and something I love in this book. And there are so many great quotes that I hope you read. And maybe I'll share some more in a longer episode. The next one is don't make assumptions. So always ask, always express what you want. Do not assume that people know what you want. And this happens in relationships. It happens in work, where we just think that person should know what we need. Or, if you want to make that career jump or you want to be promoted, you can't just assume that your boss knows that. And this is speaking as a boss. Like, please tell me. And also just, don't make assumptions. Have really clear communication. And this is powerful. Like, I think over communicating is a skill and is something that people should probably do more of rather than the opposite. And also something he talks about is having the courage to ask questions. You're not going to look silly. You're not going to look dumb. Like, just ask questions. It actually makes you look more engaged in the conversation and in what's happening. So it's really, really critical. And I love that. Finally, and also one of my favorite points from the book, honestly, I could probably talk about the 4 agreements for the entire episode, is to always do your best. And the point that he makes here is that your best looks different every day, but always do your best, whether that some days it might be 120%, some days it might be 40%, but always do your best and know that you're doing your best, and don't beat yourself up if you're not 100% every day. That's just not practical as a human being to always be doing your best. But if you always show up, then you must be doing your best, and you know better than anyone that you're doing your best. So just always do that. Which brings me to the second book, which is The War of Art, which this is a pretty new copy because I have the audiobook. I've rented this from the library multiple times and have recently ordered a hard copy, which I do for the books I love. Also, he has a second book called Turning Pro that is also just like unbelievable. But The War of Art is great. And it's actually a huge reason why I started the podcast. I was listening to this, and it talks, like, his main concept is about resistance. And resistance is this natural force and universal force that he talks about, that's this enemy against you doing what you want to do or you know you should be doing. And that shows up in the form of procrastination, perfectionism, all of these different things. Is kind of this universal force that he's calling resistance. It can also manifest in fear and self-doubt, rationalization of why you shouldn't actually be doing that thing you want to do. And it's just really, really awesome. And I love this whole concept of resistance. And it's talked about in other books as well, but this one is really punchy, quite short, and just amazing. The audiobook is only 2 hours, and it's something that I'm constantly listening to, as well as Turning Pro. So how do you actually combat resistance? And this is something he talks quite a bit about, which is really about routine and discipline, action over perfection, and also what he calls Turning Pro, which is what his second book is all about how when we're doing a creative pursuit, we're not taking it as seriously as we would our profession. So are we showing up every day regardless of how we feel, to write or to sing or to dance or to record a podcast or to work on this thing? Are we showing up all the time? And I think that concept of Turning Pro is really important, that's partially why I'm recording this podcast on video, is because when I was listening to this, I was thinking to myself, what would it mean if I turned pro with a podcast? And yes, like, I don't need video, but it really, for me, even if no one watches the video, although I know I have some people on YouTube, so that's sweet. Thank you for checking that out. It still just makes a difference for me for like feeling pro and taking this seriously. And I have the lighting, and I have to like do my hair, and I have to, get cleaned up. Like it really makes a difference for me. And it shows that I'm taking it more seriously than I would just kind of a casual pursuit. That being said, do not get caught up in this thing being perfect, because I've also gotten caught in that. And perfectionism is a form of resistance. So it is really this balancing act. that he talks about. And he also talks about how you should try and create on a daily basis. So whether that's writing or just doing something that is really a creative pursuit for you on a daily basis so that you can crack through all of that resistance, which I love. Now, I wanted to share a couple of great quotes from the book that really, really stuck with me, and I'm sure they'll stick with you as well. And they just kind of summarize what he's talking about with resistance and also that fear that we have throughout our lives in doing the creative thing and doing the thing that we know we want to do, and also not being in these shadow careers, as he calls it, versus doing what we know we are supposed to do. So the first quote, "Are you paralyzed with fear? That is a good sign. Fear is good. Like self-doubt, fear is an indicator. Fear tells us what we have to do. Remember one rule of thumb. The more scared we are of a work or calling, the more sure we can be that we have to do it." Fear is a compass, is ultimately what he's saying. Fear is an indicator of exactly what you should be doing. And I just love, love, love that quote. The second one, which is so good as well, is that we fear discovering that we are more than we think we are, more than our parents or children or teachers think we are. We fear that we actually possess the talents that our still small voice tells us, that we actually have the guts, the perseverance, the capacity. We fear that we can truly steer our ship, plant our flag, reach our promised land. We fear this because, if it's true, then we become estranged from all we know. We pass through a membrane. We become monsters and monstrous. Basically, talking about like how we don't want to prove ourselves right, that we're doing this thing, because then we kind of crack open this Pandora's box of, oh my God, if I can do this, then think of all of the other things I can do. And it's much easier to stay confined into this limited way of thinking of, oh no, I can't do that, or I'm not a good writer, I'm not a good podcaster, I'm not a good singer, whatever it is that you want to pursue, versus actually doing the thing. And also putting yourself on the line and leaning into resistance, like at the risk ultimately of people laughing at you or saying that you're not good at it, and putting yourself on the line versus just staying small. So I love that quote. We fear discovering that we are more than we think we are. Amazing. So finally, the last book that I wanted to cover is 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. I don't have this one in hard copy because I listened to the audiobook, which I would definitely recommend. Oliver, like, he's just unbelievable. All of his books and writing that he's done, and also the podcast he's been on, he's just unreal. So ironically, Oliver Burkeman started as a columnist for like a productivity sort of column in a newspaper magazine, I'm not sure. But then he basically was like, this is crazy. We're so worried about how do we become more productive that he wrote 4,000 Weeks. And the concept is that the average person only has 4,000 weeks to live, which in your mind is like, oh my God, that's not that many weeks. And if you visualize it, like there are visuals where you can color in how many weeks you've lived, which is a bit... what's the word? I can't remember the word. A bit morbid, I suppose, but it's also a great visual. And Time Management for Mortals. So his productivity book is actually anti-productivity, which I love. It's really good. So he talks about like, how do you actually embrace your limitations? Like accept the fact that there are time constraints and you're not going to get everything done. And also the more emails you respond to, the more emails people will send to you, which I think like that's hilarious. And of course, that's what we all experience. And also, of course, to prioritize what actually matters. So what brings you joy? Like what truly fulfills you, and how do you invest more of your time in that? Also, he talks about the myth of productivity and how efficiency is actually a trap, and how constantly striving for more productivity or more efficiency or more growth is just a bit of a hamster wheel, and you're ultimately just going to become burnt out and dissatisfied in your life, which I have absolutely experienced this. Similar to the other books, he talks about accepting imperfection. Things don't need to be perfect. They don't need to be efficient. It's better that you're just doing them, and embrace doing a bit less but doing it better ultimately. Also, he says to embrace finitude. So accept that you are going to die and you probably have more or less 4,000 weeks to live. And how do you actually want to make a more meaningful approach to your life and to take a more meaningful approach versus being so caught in like the hamster wheel of striving and on to the next thing, which again isn't to say to not have goals, but if your email doesn't get sent tonight and it gets sent tomorrow morning, it's not the end of the world. So it's really about kind of casting this reality check over this hustle culture that a lot of us have been caught in. And also making peace with procrastination. So it's just, he says, it's just natural that some things will get delayed. But again, to focus on how do you create meaningful experiences in your work and in your life. So finally, he talks about how do you actually prioritize deep work instead of just working ages. So really focusing on the most important, like meaningful tasks, important versus just what's urgent or what comes up or all of these fires that are being created around you. As well as, of course, like I've mentioned, how do you focus on your relationships and slow living and just like enjoying life because it is finite and we're all going to die. And morbid or not, that's just the fact. That's the only truth in life. So how do we get off of this like productivity hamster wheel and like forcing ourselves and getting stressed about emails and inbox zero, which he talks a lot about. I honestly can relate to this book so much. And inbox zero is never something that I will probably achieve. And that's okay. Because the more emails you send, the more people are going to send back to you. So that was a super rapid fire of 3 books that have completely transformed my life over the last number of years. The 4 Agreements is something that I first read 8 or 9 years ago before I moved to Australia. And it was something that really actually helped me kind of make this decision as well and be brave into leaning into moving here. 4,000 Weeks was a couple of years ago, and The War of Art was actually only more recently as I was pursuing the podcast, even though Joe has told me to read it for ages and he's upset. I have only recently actually followed his advice and read it because he has been recommending that to me for years, and he'll be happy that I gave him credit for that on the podcast. So with that, I will link all of these books below. If there are any books that you would recommend that I check out that have also changed your life, I would love to hear from you about that. If you have any comments on the podcast or you just want to reach out, I would absolutely love to hear from you. Otherwise, I hope you subscribe, stay tuned, and enjoy the rest of your week. And thank you so much for tuning into this episode. See you later. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm recording today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that are listening to the podcast.